All right, looks like it's about that time. We're going to go ahead and get things started. First of all, thank you everyone for joining this month's consulting webinar. My name is Stephen Krutzfeldt, and I'm a business process consultant here with CDI. Today's webinar is going to be another build along, and today we're going to be tackling the issue of dynamic fields and creating dynamic fields within our templates within Laserfiche. If this is your first build along, what is a build along? Well, in short, it's an interactive experience that's designed to guide the viewer through the creation and deployment of a common business process. What that means for you is that if you're following along, if you're logged into the same applications at home or at work, you can actually, by the end of today's webinar, create and deploy some dynamic template fields within your own Laserfiche environment. If at any point you have any questions or you need help or aren't following, feel free to post your questions in the chat box. You'll see that listed below on the little floating window for GoToWebinar. I will allow some time at the end of today's webinar to answer those questions, whatever you may have. And then also if you have any other issues that you want to bring up at that time, we can use that time for that as well. To get the most out of today's webinar, first of all, take good notes. For me, I like to make a lot of use of the screenshot option, but take notes, take screenshots, whatever you need. That way you can kind of backtrack and follow up on all the steps we take. It may seem like we're going a little bit fast. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions. Chances are if you miss something, you're not the only one. Somebody else also has the same question, so speak up. Please do complete the survey that's sent out afterwards as well. We do look at those. We're always trying to make improvements. Any way we can do these better, we're certainly open to those recommendations. And lastly, know that this will be recorded. We'll record it and have it up on the CDI YouTube channel, so you can go back, review it, and follow along and play it back at your own pace. So that's available. And also, if you want to reach out to our team, we're always happy to set up individual sessions and work with you one-on-one. So with that being said, today's process is going to be around creating dynamic template fields. The intended audience for this webinar is going to be advanced users and Laserfiche administrators, the individuals who have had a little bit more exposure to the solution. If you're following along at home, you're going to need access to the Laserfiche client, as well as the administration console and SQL Management Studio. So if you want to take a second to log into those now, we will be getting into each of those applications. So what are dynamic fields? When we say dynamic fields, what are we talking about? In a nutshell, dynamic fields refers to the ability for the value of a field within your metadata templates, to change dynamically based on the selection made of a previous field. Whenever I'm talking about dynamic fields, I like to use the analogy of Kelley Blue Book, that when you're trying to look up your make and model of car, you don't just have a list of 1,000 or thousands of different cars available to choose from. Instead, you select the make, then you select the model, you select the year. And each one of those options gets shorter and shorter each time. So when we're talking about dynamic fields, that's exactly what we're discussing, is creating that make first, and then that will limit the number of models you have to choose from, and so forth. To help you follow along, we're going to begin by creating a Laserfiche template, and that'll lay out what we want, where we want our dynamic fields to be kept. We'll then create a SQL table that is going to act as an external table and a reference to actually drive those dynamic fields. And then we'll finish by tying the two together and making our template dynamic. So with that, let's get into it. Now, as you can see here, I'm logged into the Laserfiche administration console. I've got a couple different repositories here that I can work with. So just if you have this also, make sure that you're selecting the one you want to work out of. Today, it's going to be the LF Financial. Within this, you can expand the actual node of which repository you want to work with. And we're going to go into metadata management node and expand that. And we're going to select templates. So this is where we create all of our metadata templates. You'll see I have a few already created here. And if you want to create a new one, we're going to right click within the canvas here and select new template. Now for today's template, we're going to be using the example of classes, that if you were to register for classes, you would pick the term the subject, and the actual class that you want to take. And so that's the example we're going to be using today, meaning that I'm going to give my template a specific name of classes. Description you can put in to make it more descriptive, of course. I'm just going to leave it blank. And we'll go ahead and start inserting our fields. Now, I've actually created this in the past, and so some of my fields already exist. But I'm going to go ahead and select term as being the top one. Before you start creating this, you're obviously going to want to have an idea of what you want your template to look like, and which is going to be the parent field, which one's going to drive the others. So think top down, make first, then model type of thing. So in this case, I'm going to select the term first. So which term is our class going to be? We'll then want to select the subject. So what general subject is it going to be? And then followed by the actual class name itself. If you're creating these from scratch, you can just go ahead and double click on each one of these and actually type in the name of the class, or sorry, of the field that you want as well. I would also pay attention to the width that you want to allow the correct number of characters. You don't want it to not be available because it's limited. I usually like to extend this out to 75, even 100, if you just want to make sure that you're covering all your bases and it's not going to stop you from having your selections. Now, another thing is, you'll notice that the type here is text, but we do have the option to select a list value. And I know that you're thinking that, well, it's going to be a list. If it's a dynamic field, then there has to be a list dropdown. But within templates, if you're using dynamic fields and you're using an external table as a lookup, you can leave it as text and it'll just automatically become a dropdown. So you can go ahead and leave it as text, but I think dropdown would work just as fine as well. You'll see me leave it as type text. So now that we've created our template, we have an idea of what that's going to look like and which fields are going to be in which order. And so we're just going to hit OK and leave that created for now and walk away. So we've got a few other steps we need in order to actually make this dynamic. Now the next piece is going to be to get into Excel, preferably Excel, and put together an idea of what you want those different lists to be like and what you want that to actually look like. Now in my case, I'm going to need to have at least 3 different columns, one for term, one for subject, and one for class. And I'm going to need to have all of the different possibilities here in order to make it dynamic. So you'll see here that we've got a lot of fall terms, 2019 here, and then we go down to spring and then summer. So there's really only 3, but we have to repeat it every time for as many classes as there are, because that's the one that's going to be unique. Similarly, the subject, we're going to have multiple because we need one for each iteration. So we see here that what it's actually going to look like, what the final product is going to look like, is we'll be able to select our term. Maybe we'll select it as fall 2019, and sciences. Once we select sciences, we'll have the option to select anthropology, astronomy, so on and so forth, all the way down. So when you're composing your table, just keep that in mind that you're going to need to have each iteration or each option created within the table. The other thing that I'll direct your attention to is this ID column. Now this is going to be important when creating SQL tables because we'll want there to be a specifying ID field for each one of these as well. So make sure that no matter what table you create or how many columns you have, the first one is always ID. Now, once you've organized your thoughts and you've organized your tables and you have an idea of what you want those different fields to look like, we can go ahead and save this and we're just gonna collapse it here for now. And we need to get into SQL Management Studio. Now, if you're a novice with SQL Management Studio, I'm not going to go through a lot of details of exactly everything you can do within SQL, but I will show you some of the basics in order to at least create these dynamic tables. Now, first and foremost, we'll want to make sure we're logged in as an administrator, and we're going to be working specifically with our databases at the top. Now, in order to make sure that we're not overwriting any important information, it may be helpful to actually create a new database at this point, something that's specifically designed to maintain data that's used for your tables. So I'm going to go ahead and just right-click here and create new database. And so if you're following along, feel free to do that as well, that you're not going to break anything. Give the database a name. In this case, since this is only for external tables, You could call it external tables. You could also just call it dynamic fields. And that's really all you need to do at this point is just we're creating a database that's empty at this point so we can store our data later. And so we'll hit OK. Now in my case, I've already got one called LF, external tables, specifically designed for housing external tables for Laserfiche. And you'll notice it will create all of these subfolders automatically. Now the ones we need to work out of are actually the tables today, that the tables are what's going to drive our dynamic fields. So you can select your newly created database, expand the tables node, and we're actually going to right-click and select table. So database, tables, right-click, table. Now when we select that, it's going to prompt us to start describing what our columns are going to be. What is this table going to look like? We're not to the point of copying and pasting and actually creating the table yet. We first have to create the structure. So what are the columns going to be and what type of data are we going to be housing in each of those columns? So the first column, regardless, always, it's best practice to have this be an ID field. And ID, if you go to the dropdown, we want to select integer or int, because it's going to be a number. And then it's also important to say that this is what's going to be the identity. So if you go down here in the column properties for ID, we can see identity specification is identity. We want to make sure that that's selected to yes, that the ID field is in fact going to be the identity specification for this table. Once we've done that, we can select the second row. And now we want our columns to line up exactly the way they are created on our Excel spreadsheet. So in this case, my columns are ID, term, subject, class name. So if we go back here, I'll want to make sure that term is the next one. And now term is going to be something like fall 2019 or summer 2019. So it's using letters and numbers. And so that's a variety of different characters. And in this, that's actually called varchar. Not varchar. And that other number is how many characters it's going to be. So various different characters, a variety of characters for 50. I think it's always best practice to expand that, even if you know it's not going to go past it. Make sure it's at least 100. Otherwise, it will cause issues if you try to enter a value into this that exceeds that. It's going to cause problems. So make sure that you have varchar and then at least 100 or even more if you want to cover all your bases. So the next one's going to be subject. It's also going to be varchar. Once again, we'll do 100 just to be safe. And lastly is class name. You'll notice in here, I am allowing some of those to be null. So if something doesn't come in or some of them are empty, it's not going to cause any issues. But once we have each of our columns selected and the data type, then we can go ahead and hit save. There's a little save icon up here. It'll ask us to name the table. I'm just going to call it classes, something that's easy to remember. It will be important, by the way, to remember what you name this. Also, you'll want to remember what database it's saved to, that this will come in, not come in handy, it'll be needed when you actually try to identify the table within Laserfiche. So you'll need to know the database name, which is listed over here, as well as the table name, which in this case is classes. So once we save that, we can go ahead and close it. And if we right-click on our tables and refresh, we'll see here now that our classes table has been created. Now, if you right-click this again, we can start filling in and populating those different fields or those different columns that we had just created. So we'll right-click and we want to edit top 200 rows. So we see here there's nothing in there, but it does have our columns at the top. So let's go in here to our Excel spreadsheet. And we're going to want to copy everything. I'm actually going to leave out the headers here because otherwise those are going to come in and become values within the actual table, which I don't want. So I've got my own headers within SQL. So just Shift, grab that, grab everything. And I'm going to right click copy or Control C if you want. And we'll go back over to the SQL Management Studio. And we're going to paste that in. You'll notice it's thinking, loading those in. And now we have it. Just like that, we created a SQL table. So the ID came in and automatically populated. Notice that each one of these IDs is unique, and it just went in ascending order. Brought in all of our different terms, subjects, and class names, all just fine. So now that that's in place, the next step is going to be to tell Laserfiche that we have this new table that we want to sync up with our templates. So we're going to go back into the administration console. And once again, we're going to go under metadata management. And in this case, since we're going to be updating the templates, we first need to tell it that there's a new external table that we're going to read from. So metadata management, external tables. And we'll right click in the pane here, and we're going to register a new external table. The alias is up to you, whatever you want to call it, that will help you remember that this table is the one we're looking for. In this case, I'm just going to call it classes because that's what it's actually called. The database, remember we saw that earlier. It's the database we created over here, and you can find that under database name. In this case, it's LF external tables. I should probably copy that. And the table name. And the table name, once again, can also be found over here if you want to go back. And actually it would be this right here. Not the DBO, but just classes. So leave DBO dot out, and it'll be classes there. And if you want to test this to see if this actually connected and it's working correctly, you can use the view option. It'll prompt us to save, and we'll say yes, we can save. And if it works, then we will actually be able to see our table right here within this window. So everything looks great. So we're going to go ahead and close out of that and hit OK. So now we have our external table linked. And now that we have this table here, we can go into our template and actually tell the template to utilize those fields, thus making the fields dynamic. So I'm going to double click on my classes template here. And you'll see there's a tab here specifically for dynamic fields. It's empty right now, so we're going to go ahead and insert some of the options. So it's first going to ask us which field do we want to make dynamic. And I always recommend going in order, making sure that you have the parent fields populating first, which one's going to drive the next and the next, so on and so forth. Since term is the first one, we want term to be at top. We're going to use our classes external table, and we want to use specifically the term column. And there is no parent field at this point because it's the very top level. So if that's good, we can apply it and insert another one. Oops. And next we want to do subject, because subject comes next. Once again, we're going to use the classes external table that we just created. We're going to have it connect to the subject column within our SQL table, and the parent field is actually going to be the term. So we select term and hit add, and it'll tell us that the parent field is now term, meaning that once term is selected, our options will be limited to only those that match the term. And the last piece of this is going to be class name. Once again, from SQL table classes, matching with class name. In this case, we want to make sure that the subject is actually the parent field, meaning that once the subject is selected, that will limit us to the number of classes that we can select within this field. So from there, we can hit apply and hit OK. And now we have a dynamic template, or at least a template with dynamic fields for classes, and that's built within our LF Financial repository. So let's go ahead and test it out and see how it works. We'll go to our Laserfiche. It's going to give us a couple of repositories to choose from. Use LF Financial. And I'm using the Fit client, but just so you know, if you're using the web client, it'll work all the same. Now in here, we can go ahead and just create a new document, and we'll see our template option drop down here. And we're going to select classes. Now you'll see here that there are only 3 options: fall, spring, and summer 2019. Select fall 2019. We have a limited number of subjects here. Maybe let's say mathematics. And then we have the mathematics classes here to choose from, so like statistics. Now if we want to change this around, maybe we want to see arts and humanities, we'll see the different arts and humanities. Similarly with social sciences, we've got different social sciences. So the way that works is if we also change the term, because that's a parent field, it'll automatically clear all these out and give us the options for that term and then those subjects and so on and so forth. So that is how you create dynamic fields in Laserfiche. Just to kind of review the steps, I began by creating my template so I knew what the template was going to look like. Next, I laid out the different fields that I was going to be using in an Excel spreadsheet, making sure that there was an iteration for each one of the different options. I always think it kind of helps to visualize the logic after I've seen what the end product looks like, and then also how it should look beforehand too. That's making sure you have fall 2019 for every single one of those, and then all the different subjects and so on and so forth. So once we've done that, then we logged in and we created a new database. And then within the database, we went to tables, we created a new table. We selected integer for the ID field, and we selected varchar 50 or 100 for each one of these. We then went back into the admin console and went to our external tables and registered our external table. And then we went into templates, into dynamic fields, and we added those dynamic fields and options. So hopefully you're able to follow along. It can be a complex idea, but it's very powerful. I use it in most of my templates whenever I can. So hopefully you find this valuable as well. So with that, if you have any questions, there are a variety of different resources out there from both Laserfiche as well as CDI. Laserfiche Answers is probably the most robust. I will say that every single time I've ever had a question about anything Laserfiche related, I typically Google it, and the very top post is always something from Laserfiche Answers. So absolutely copy this down, keep it on the toolbar, keep it as a quick reference point. If by some chance nobody has ever asked your question before, feel free to post it to the forum and somebody will most likely answer it within a couple of minutes even. Also the Solution Exchange, another great option, as well as here at Cities Digital, we have peakportals.com/documents, and a lot of documentation for a variety of different issues, answers, and questions that you may have. Please do fill out the survey afterwards for a chance to win an awesome mug. Not only that, but we're also always looking for recommendations on what to do for our next monthly webinar on. You guys have given us a lot of great ideas. This one actually came from some of our listeners, and I thought it was a great idea. It's certainly one that I use daily. So hopefully all of you can also now get in the habit of creating dynamic fields. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into the chat and open this up for some questions. If you have any of those, post those now. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. And also note, remember, this will be recorded and should be posted to the CDI YouTube channel within the next 24 hours or so. I don't know about you guys, but I find videos extremely helpful. Just going back, pausing, rewatching really helps drive home how to run through some of these more complex issues. If there aren't any questions, I'll also take recommendations for anything that you'd like to see or anything that you've been hoping would come up as a consulting webinar, anything that you'd like to learn more about. We're always taking recommendations for that as well. Tricks, etc. So just general things that we've sort of picked up over the years, little things that may not necessarily be, so just like tricks in general. I'm sure if we kind of crowdsource that, I'll bet there's a lot of tricks out there. That actually might be a good one. Oh, I'm sorry, more webinars on searching tips or tricks. I didn't expand it, I just saw tricks. So there's another question here, sorry. Is SQL Management Studio an additional application that needs to be purchased? No, so SQL Management Studio should be already installed on the server where Laserfiche is installed. That Laserfiche actually utilizes Microsoft SQL, so the Management Studio should be there. You may have to work with your IT group in order to make sure that you do have access to it, but that would be housed on the same server as Laserfiche. And we got another idea for a topic, be how to build business processes and workflow. Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly take that down, that business processes in general, workflow are always something that even when you think you know it, somebody else comes up with more options and possibilities. So there's always options to learn there. So that'll be a good one. Thank you for the recommendation. In SQL database, you use the underscore for a space in the column header. Is this required? No, so the reason I did that is simply because it doesn't like spaces. I mean, you can use spaces, but it just makes the queries a little bit more tricky. So it's best to use camel case or to utilize underscores or other characters like that. But no, it's not required that you use an underscore in general. Yeah, SQL does get a little bit finicky when you're doing different queries and things like that, and so the space can make it a little trickier. So I would say best practice is to use an underscore or use camel case. All right, well, things are slowing down. So with that, I'm going to let you guys get back your day. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate the feedback, appreciate the questions. And once again, feel free to reach out to the CDI team with any other issues that may arise. We're always happy to meet with you one-on-one, share our knowledge, and hopefully we'll see you again next month. Thank you.